Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished chairperson and panelists, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I want to especially appreciate the PPD Secretariat for inviting me to the conference and to share my views and experience on resource mobilization as it has to do with South, and triangular cooperation. Thanks to the government of Bangladesh for their hospitality. Thank you very much. And our partners from UNFPA, we are very thankful to you. Thank you very much. Having said that, and with the limited time that we have, I'll be sharing some views with us which are framed in 3 points. Number one, we're talking of resource mobilization in the context of South and triangular cooperation. It's okay. Yeah. Cooperation. And we're looking at 3 points here. If we're going to do effective resource mobilization, we need to understand the quantum of funding that we're talking about. What is the quantum? What does it look like? I had Dr. Asa mentioning from UNFPA talking about to fund ICPD about $260 million. And she mentioned that only 40 is available. So we have a funding gap of 220. That's huge. And then what is the cost of achieving the ambitious SDG targets? That will help us to know how to actually mobilize this resource. Number 2, if we understand this, we're developing a PPD resource mobilization strategy. I'm aware that PPD has a strategic plan 2020 to 2024, and then maybe subsequently we'll be looking at a strategic plan 2025 to 2030. There's a need to develop a robust resource mobilization strategy for South and triangular cooperation to incorporate it into the 2025-2030 strategic plan. And lastly, if we are going to achieve effective transformation and not just a pocket of solutions, scalable solutions, we must look at innovative financing mechanisms different from a business as usual. What quantum of funding are we talking about here? UNCTAD and the economists have estimated to achieve the SDG targets with about $6.9 to $7.6 trillion per year, with funding gap of $1.4 to $3 trillion from now until 2030. That is not going to come from pockets of grants. It's not going to come from only aids. World Development Report estimated the cost of achieving the ambitious SDG targets about $7 trillion per year, with almost $4.5 trillion dedicated to developing countries. That's huge. The funding gap cannot be mobilized through only traditional resources. We must look at business as usual, go beyond the domestic resource mobilization and development aids to meet the funding gap. We have the vision of PPD. We have the 2030 agenda is here, goal 3, goal 10, goal 16. And to achieve, and goal 17, of course, to achieve this will require huge funding. If we are targeting transformation in the achieving of these SDG targets, according to the vision and mission of PPD, in the context of South and triangular mobilization cooperation, it cannot be resource mobilization with a business as usual model. The only way to achieve this is through innovative mechanisms. I'm going to talk about a couple of innovative financing mechanisms. Some of our panelists have mentioned some of them. I won't talk much about what South cooperation partnership is about because of our time, but we know that South triangular cooperation can actually improve effectiveness and efficiency of development assistance efforts through collaborative, innovative, adaptable, scalable, affordable, cost-efficient, and context-based development solutions. And let me skip this slide and go further. Now, we have PPD has a 5-year strategic plan, 2020 to 2024, However, it's very important to incorporate resource mobilization strategy into the next 5-year strategic plan for South-South triangulation cooperation, which will incorporate specifically innovative financing mechanisms and model. The resource mobilization strategy we're talking about will include operational dimensions with SSTC as one of the accelerators with measurable impacts. This is very critical. What are the innovative financing mechanisms for South-South and triangular cooperation? Traditional resource mobilization, we're not going to throw that away. It's going to include traditional donors, domestic resources, which we are used to. Some of our panelists have mentioned about that, to fund SSTC. We are not going to ignore that. But most importantly, we're going to look at also the mechanisms already created. Dr. Dennis mentioned some of them, from UN Office of South-South Cooperation. He mentioned China South-South Cooperation Assistance Fund, India-Brazil South Africa Facility. He mentioned India UN Development. I won't go too far into that. He has mentioned that. Those are low-hanging fruits that we have been used to. We should also continue to mobilize resources through them. But most importantly, I want to mention the need to craft development solutions that are bankable. I work with Development Finance Institution, a development bank, for 5 years at the Office of Vice President Operations. We receive business plans, about 50 every month, and only 5 of them, most cases, we can proceed further with them. And unfortunately, we cannot fund more than 2 or 3 because the solutions are not bankable. I had the panelist, Mr. Feti Mesa, mention the need for countries to come together as a in the regional economic community to develop solutions that are bankable. And if we are going to achieve this, we have a huge funding gap to fund the ambitious SDG targets. So we need these innovative financing mechanisms that are bankable. Several development finance institutions in Africa, they have project preparation grants. Development banks, East African Development Bank, ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development. We have South African Development Bank. They have project preparation grants that they are looking for countries to work with to develop bankable solutions. Apart from that, we have international financial institutions. We have multilateral institutions. The funding are there in the tune of billions of dollars. They are there. Funding is not a problem. But we have innovative solutions that are bankable, that is, institutions can actually commit to. So it's very important to begin to look at this. Number 2, funding from public and concessional resources, they are very scarce. Some of the panelists have mentioned the need to engage the private sector. We are talking of $3 trillion funding gap. It's not going to come from aids. It's not going to come from only member governments. We're going to engage private sector, public-private partnership. And in this case, you can actually reduce the interest on concessional loans. In development finance institution, when you come as a private sector, you may have interest rate of between 5 to 7%. But when you come in the form of public-private partnership with multi-countries, you can drop the interest rate to as low as 2.5 to 2%. Government is sovereign, so interest comes down. So it's extremely critical to mobilize private sector resources. I want to emphasize that because public sector financing are limited, we must begin to use public sector and concessional funds to catalyze and mobilize private sector financing. Government funding are limited. So we must use those funds either to prepare projects or to de-risk our investment. This is the only way to do it. Then we can catalyze huge private sector investment. And in this case, this is the only way to do it. Public-funded financial instruments, you also target barriers or risks that are constraining or inhibiting private investment, rather than simply being used to fund them. In this way, you can actually crowd out private sector investment. So this is the only way to do it. Otherwise, we cannot, close this huge funding gap. As I conclude, I want to mention some of the innovative financing mechanisms that I have adopted, that we have used in my previous work experience, working for development banks and as a former United Nations official. We have sovereign wealth funds. And to date, we have about 54 countries in the world that have sovereign wealth funds. Nigeria has sovereign wealth fund. Ghana has sovereign wealth fund. They call it Petroleum Fund. We have Tanzania. They call it Oil and Gas Fund. We have UAE. They are there, and we can access it. Some can come as pockets of grants, but most likely they come as equity financing, mezzanine financing, concessional resources. They are available. For example, look at the case of Nigeria. The Nigeria Sovereign Wealth Fund actually fund 3 hospitals in Nigeria. They call it Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority Healthcare Development and Investment Company in collaboration with Federal Ministry of Health. They execute joint venture for investment in 3 federal institutions in Nigeria. And it was a huge phenomenon, about $80 million. Countries can come together, develop innovative solutions. The funding are there. Resources are not scarce, but we lack innovative development solutions that these institutions can support. This is the way to go. Pension funds is one of the innovative financing mechanisms. We have over 22 trillion worth of global assets in pension funds. If our solutions are bankable, if they are innovative, they can fund them. I've tried that in my previous work life. They are available. We cannot build scalable and lasting development transformation only on packets of grants or development aids. Look at the huge gap, even for ICPD. $220 million, not about $3 million. It's not going to come from member states alone. It's going to come from public-private partnership, and it's one of the ways to go. As I round up, we have a global climate finance architecture. In addition to reproductive health, in addition to gender parity, we have issues with urbanization, with population development. We have urbanization, we have migration, we have climate change. There are issues in population and development, and we have global climate finance architecture. We have one of the largest one, where Dr. Asa is, that's Green Climate Fund, in Songdo, in South Korea. I led the accreditation of the whole of ECOWAS to Green Climate Fund. I used to be there every 3 months, many years ago, in Songdo. The fund is huge. It's the largest global climate finance architecture. We can harness that. Development banks have been accredited. Countries can come together, can submit proposals to them. Innovative solutions, they are available. We have Climate Investment Fund. It's in Washington, D.C. I used to represent Africa and the Middle East in the 48 transformation developing countries to climate investment for 6 years. The funding are there. Most countries, especially Africa, don't come there to harness these resources. I was there for 6 years. They are available. Global Environmental Facility, Adaptation Fund. One of the panelists the other time mentioned about the case of countries with natural resources. We have adaptation levy. We can begin to take adaptation levy from countries that are extracting our resources. We can use to fund development. This is important. We have green bonds. These are part of innovative financing mechanisms that we can use to fund our South-South and triangular cooperation. This instrument refer to proceed used specifically for securitization, direct exposure of development solutions, or new green solutions. Any solution that is green can be funded from the global climate finance architecture, from green bonds. Even there, recently now, there's something called green pension funds. It can be used. It's a part of the assets that we have to fund South-South cooperation. Thank you very much. I'll stop.